It's my pleasure to introduce Gregg.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for being here, taking time out of your day. I'll share some stories about the organization and some of my travels with you guys today, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So my pleasure to be here. I want to start deep in the Andes, so this is just south of Santiago, Chile. And we had been 6 days in crossing these snowfields that had far more snow than we had anticipated. It was a really snowy winter, and we got there a little bit sooner in the spring than we had anticipated. And so 6 days walking across these snowfields, we had fallen in rivers. My hiking partner, Dea, got swept downstream at one point, and it was extremely brutal. Every night as we would go to sleep, we were freezing and weren't really prepared for these conditions, just again, unexpected in this area. But like so many times before in the Andes, these scenes were so beautiful. Every step I would take at the sunset, once the ice had formed a little sheen over the top of the snow again, the crystals of ice would break and float across the top of the snow, make sounds like glass just breaking across, and every single step had that. It was so beautiful. We finally started descending on day 7, and we were down to a can of tuna between us because our progress had been slowed so much. So we had a can of tuna. We had no idea how far we would be from any real types of provisions, but knew we were about 40 miles from the nearest town. And we started descending this lava field, which is 16 miles across and 16 miles long, and would post hole through the snow onto these sharp lava rocks and start cutting ourselves repeatedly. So we had no choice but to retreat over to a pile of ash from the volcano and start walking down that. And when we finally reached the bottom of this lake bed, we were caught in an ash storm so bad that we couldn't see each other a mere 10 feet apart from one another. So we took off our shirts and wrapped them around our heads to try to keep the ash and sand from going into our eyes and mouths and ears and pretty much everywhere it could get in. Finally made it through that and then made it to Lago Invernada. So we had done our homework about this lake, Lago Invernada, or Hibernation Lake, up in northern Chile, and looked at Google Earth. There were 2 beautiful trails around either side. We looked at our maps. There were 2 beautiful trails around either side, and we got there, and because of the spring snowmelt, the lake had risen so much that the trails were underwater, and there was just no way to traverse around them. So we were greeted with this cliff that you see on the right side of the screen there, and we had no choice but to rock climb around the side. Well, it took about 3 or 4 seconds before we realized that it wasn't going to be safe to rock climb around this. 35-degree water. It's about 45 or 50 degrees outside, and the wind was blowing and gusting pretty hard. And so we retreated back to this rock fall, took off all our clothes, waterproofed everything in our pack, and blew up stuff sacks so we'd had enough air in the pack to keep it buoyant, and then just started pulling ourselves along the edges here. And as we went around these blind corners, not knowing what was going to be around the corner, if we'd be able to get around this water at all, we finally did reach another rock fall that looked like this, much smaller, and climbed out on it. And right as I was about to jump back in the water, sure that I was okay, it hit me, and hypothermia like I've never felt before set in. And I just started shivering, unable to have any motor skills. I could barely stand up. I couldn't talk, and started mumbling and sat down and was able to fumble through my pack enough to get out my sleeping bag. And 2 hours later, I was warm enough after making tea and finally getting rid of the shivers to jump back in and do it all over again. And 36 hours later, we finally made it to the other side of this lake. But as we sat there that night, imagining and trying to figure out what the hell we were doing here and why we were here, it was the creativity that we had to be able to float our packs like that. It was the optimism that we had that kept us going in just about every situation. I mean, truth be told, you don't have a ton of options in a situation like this. You kind of have to be optimistic and keep going, and it's the persistence. You know, the choices were to lay there and die or to keep going. Very really, those were our choices. And once we did get to the other side, it wound up being about 35 miles down to the nearest town, where we ran into a guy on horseback who brought us into his house and fed us. But it was that persistence, and it's been consistently part of my expeditions everywhere in the world. This in the Okavango Delta in northern Botswana. We've come across some pretty challenging situations where creativity, optimism, and persistence are the common theme. Those are the things that have really been part of every adventure that I've been on. Whether they're tracking wolverines in Mongolia, where we skied for 26 days to look for what we discovered to be one of the densest populations of wolverines on the planet, going across frozen lakes or lakes that should have been much drier or much more frozen than they were. Spent 4 days traversing this one in southern South America. This was brutal, and every time I see it, I relive it a little bit. It makes me sad. Every night as we would go to sleep, our tent would fill with water because there's just nowhere to avoid this. And so by midnight every night, we were up walking again, pretty tired of this situation. So it was through these expeditions and then my experiences in the sciences. So I tracked lynx and wolverines and grizzly bears up in Montana and worked as a wildlife biologist. And it was through these experiences that I realized that the skill sets that lend themselves to both of these, that persistence, optimism, and creativity, are really important for both of these fields. And I also at the same time had experienced firsthand and seen firsthand the environmental issues that are plaguing our planet. We live in a time when it's really scary. Things like coral bleaching and deforestation, illegal timber harvests, antibiotic resistance, wildlife trafficking and poaching, harmful algal blooms, the list goes on, shark finning. These are massive, massive issues. There are a few of these issues, though, where data is a limiting factor to finding their solution. And when I realized this from those experiences and from seeing these and from talking with other scientists, I had a vision for adventure scientists. So our mission is to equip partners with data that can unlock solutions. And I want to share with you how thousands of people now share that vision and are doing this all over the world. When I created the organization in 2011, I didn't imagine in my wildest dreams that it would have taken off like it has. But we've really narrowed down our focus to 3 main questions. And so each of the projects I'll share with you today really focus on number 1, there being an environmental issue where data is a limiting factor to unlocking a solution, where there's a clear need for a remote network of outdoor adventurers, and that ranges from the greatest adventurers in the world down to people who just love to go out on day hikes. So anybody in this room can certainly get involved if you've ever spent time in the outdoors. We'd love to have you as an adventurer as well. And then the third question is that there is a tangible outcome, something different before and after the project, or at least a strong opportunity for making change in the world. So this is a map of our successful expeditions that have gone out collecting data, and they've done that for a variety of projects. I'll start with this one, really highlights the caliber of adventure that's come to us and has worked with us, but also talks about our snow and ice project.
Dr. Natalie Kerwald is working over in Venice, Italy, and her research is all about understanding how quickly glaciers are thinning throughout the world.
Something that's really new about my work is that I'm able to show that glaciers are melting, losing mass at elevations even as high as 6,000 meters above sea level, which is about 20,000 feet above sea level. This is important because we don't know how much fresh water exists in the world. And glaciers essentially are a big reservoir of fresh water. Some areas of the central Himalayas, for example, where Jeremy was, provides water for a minimum of 500 million people, and it could be up to 2 billion people.
I'm taking snow samples for this climate study.
My final samples came after this 12-hour day up at high elevation, and just to dig a pit at that elevation and get down deep within the glacier to get the proper samples. It takes some time.
To dig down about 6 feet, and every 1.5 feet we'll come in and take snow samples and send them to Italy, where they're doing the study at the University of Venice.
My science teacher from high school that I barely passed I'll be very happy to know that I was part of a science experiment.
So Jeremy's been a great ambassador for us. For those of you who don't know, he's one of the world's best snowboarders. He's a 10-time world champion snowboarder. And another of our projects, we ask volunteers traveling all around the world to collect scat samples. So these are animal poops. We do this in as many diverse locations as we can for Harvard Medical School. And what we do with these is send them back to the lab to identify the origins of the Enterococcus genus of bacteria. And that bacteria, which is one of the oldest on the planet, it actually was in the fossil record from the time that the original animals came out of the sea and started to move onto land. And because it's one of the most prolific and one of the oldest, our partner scientists believe that in their genetic code is the keys to understanding antibiotic resistance and where antibiotic resistance comes from. So they're working to isolate the genes responsible for antibiotic resistance in order to one day turn it off in clinical settings. So an incredible tangible outcome that we're shooting for, again, clear need for a dispersed network of adventurers and the environmental issue of antibiotic resistance. Another project we work on is on the American Prairie Reserve. This is in northeastern Montana, an effort to build the largest protected area in the lower 48 states. We're actually just wrapping up year 3 of a 3-year project here. So we've brought volunteers from all over the world to come and live on the prairie. They walk 10 to 12 miles a day. They are checking wildlife cameras, which captured these images while they're out there documenting the migration corridors, the pathways that these animals move, where we've been looking at sage-grouse collisions with fence lines, prairie dog colonies, and how they're expanding, affecting black-footed ferret populations, and a number of other projects out on the prairie. So I want to highlight one of our teams that's out on a project. The Surf Explore team is a collection of French, Hawaiian, English, and Italian surfers, and these guys are at the top of their game. They're traveling around the world in search of the next greatest waves. They're looking for the most picturesque sites where they can go and practice their art. They're featured in dozens of magazines as they go and do this all around the world. And they came to us, their leader did, Erwin Simon, acknowledging the same feeling that I had originally on my expeditions, that each of us has a responsibility and a role to play in these problems, but most people just don't know what they can do to help. And so today, Erwin and his team, as they travel, collect 1-liter samples of water for our microplastics project. So for those of you who haven't heard of them, have you guys all heard of microplastics at this point? Has anybody heard of them? All right, we have a lot of work to do, Abby. So microplastics, by definition, are smaller than 5 millimeters in size. In this case, they're about the size of a human hair, or even smaller than that. We're able to look down to 50 microns, which is about half the size of a human hair, to see these things under microscopes. And so along with Erwin and his team, we have freshwater boaters that are out paddling just about every single day, rowing across oceans and marine water, people who are sailing across oceans that are collecting these samples for us. And they go from, they basically get collected, and we have been able to, through this network of volunteers, to collect what we believe is one of the largest data sets on the planet for microplastics. In this map, each of the different size circles represents how much plastic we found in each sample. And I'll zoom into the coast of West Africa here just so you can get a sense of the resolution on these. And they get shipped to our lab in Maine. So this is Abby, who's behind you guys here. She's our partner scientist on this project. And Abby basically runs them through a vacuum filtration pump, puts the plastics onto filter papers like this, and has found to date that in our marine samples, 90% of the samples have had plastics in them. 90%. So think about that. That means that if you go out and collect a 1-liter sample of water from anywhere on the surface of the ocean, so far our results are showing a 90% chance that you're going to find plastics in there. And not just one, we've had an average of 8 pieces per liter, and those numbers are as of yesterday. This data was used in the establishment of a marine protected area, the largest on the planet, in Palau. The EPA is hoping to include our methodology as one of 5 sets that will make it uniform how these are sampled across the United States. We partner with businesses like Patagonia and others who are now working to make more sustainable products as a result of the knowledge they've gained from ours and from others' work on microplastics. So again, tangible impact that we're really proud of. and are looking for ways to continue that research to be more and more relevant every day. With the World Resources Institute, we are launching, we're right now fundraising for the launch of a new project that would take advantage of new handheld DNA sequencers. So a lot of you guys have probably heard of these things, or if you haven't, you will soon. But this nanopore technology allows the size of a Google phone. You can go out and actually sequence DNA now with something that's just that big. Really incredible stuff. And I've equated this to having Google out there, but there's no information on the web for it to draw from. So what we're going to do is go out and collect tree leaves, cones, cores, fruits, and establish a reference library against which these handheld DNA sequencers can draw, so that someday soon at every port city in the world, port officials will be able to measure incoming timber harvests to their ports and determine on the spot whether they were legally or illegally harvested based on the genetic code. Really exciting work. One of the things our partners tell us that is most beneficial about our work isn't just the data. It's the fact that we bring artists and musicians and storytellers, writers, people who are photographers, videographers from all walks of the arts. And they're able to come to these projects as ambassadors for these projects and come back with stories. In the rich tradition of outdoor storytelling, we're able to magnify these issues across a huge audience. And that's been one of the best things for us to recruit other volunteers. So we rely on top-tier athletes like Jeremy Jones that you met. This is Lakey Peterson, who's one of the best female surfers in the world. Mike Lebecki is one of our ambassadors. He's the guy dangling from the middle of nowhere in Greenland there. We also do a lot of speeches like these to help recruit volunteers. We actually don't know the actual size of our network. To date, we've had, well, last year alone, we had 19,206 days contributed to the organization. And we've never really been tested in how big our organization is. So we look forward to the day when the amount of data that is requested or that our partners need is more than we can go and get, but we certainly haven't hit that just yet. Every volunteer comes into the organization is screened to make sure they have adequate background in the adventure sports, that they're going to be safe doing what they need to do. They then have to go through a training. That might be watching a training video like this one for our microplastics project. It might be an online set of questions that they're going to go through. Every volunteer is going to go through a test. They have to get 100% on the test to make sure that they've actually read and downloaded those protocols, that they've watched the videos. This is one of the many ways that we work to ensure quality control of our data. Then they're going to go through a training. So a lot of times these will happen in person across the world. We can do these trainings. And in many cases, it does happen online. It just depends on how in-depth the training needs to be, how in-depth the science is. One of the things that I think would be an amazing partnership with Google would be to do educational trainings using virtual reality. It's such a cool way to engage people. So something I think about a lot. Through a partnership with GoPro, we have selected volunteers wearing cameras in the field so that we can check their protocols and check what they've done there. We have self-assessments built into the apps that we use. So questions like, did you remember to rinse your bottle 3 times? Did you remember to cap your bottle underwater? Those are things that happen in the field. And then the next step of this will be, if your answer is no, a little video pops up to show you why that's so important. So we're working on developing that as well. If anybody wants to help with that, let me know. So another big part of how we control our quality is in the projects we choose to take on. And so we found that anything that involves remote sensing or using sensors works really well, where we can train people in the technology, how to take the readings, how to service the equipment. That's something we focus on. And then anything where there's an actual collection. So whether we're collecting a tree sample, whether we're collecting a water sample that can go to a real lab with a real scientist, that's what we really aim for with each of these projects. Almost everything is getting collected digitally using apps these days. We do have a lot of redundancy built in, so people are using paper and pencil as backups, but this is the primary means that we use. And then we manage the volunteers as well. So we have a pretty complex system where we do check in with the volunteers regularly. Almost every one of them is going to have direct interaction with a staff member so that they actually know who they're collecting for, that they really feel like their work is going to be valued, and it is every single day. So to highlight a few projects that we're currently developing, so I mentioned the one with the World Resources Institute. We're very close to launching that one, are currently raising funds for a pilot on that. With roadkill, this is a major problem across the United States alone. About 1 million a million mammals are killed every single day on US highways. That is a wild statistic. We've found that overpasses and underpasses and mitigation techniques are wildly successful at reducing these, over 80% reductions in places where they are, and it's reducing an $8.4 billion a year issue in the United States. So this is a massive issue, and what we want to do is, starting in California, there's 156,000 miles of paved roadway in California, and utilizing road bikers, we're going to go out and survey every single mile of roadway. We're doing that in partnership with the UC Davis Road Ecology Center, Defenders of Wildlife, the Fish and Wildlife from California, California Fish and Wildlife has signed on to the project, offering a letter of support saying that they need this data and will use this data to help prioritize the placement of these overpasses and underpasses and other mitigation structures. So another great project that, if you're a road biker, will soon come to New York. The idea is to start in California, where there are the most people and the most miles of roadway, massive protected areas, and wildlife moving across them. So it's one of the biggest issues there. It's a $230 million a year issue in California. Another project we're really excited about is with pollinators. When you guys think of pollinators, chances are you're thinking of honeybees or monarch butterflies. A lot of work has been done on monarchs, but there's over 200,000 other pollinators out there. And none of them, that's not fair. None of them have been studied in the backcountry. Very few of them have been studied in the front country, and none of them have really been studied in the backcountry. So we know a lot about what's happening in front country environments, but we don't know if these pollinators are taking refuge in remote environments. We don't know what plants they're relying on, if they're doing that. We don't know if they're actually declining around the world. And so, starting with a pilot in partnership with the University of Arizona and the National Phenology Network, we're developing a project to go out and survey 100 remote sites across the United States. Then it will be 1,000 in phase 2, and then 5,000 across the world after that, to do an unprecedented survey of remote environments of how these pollinators are surviving. So volunteers will go up and spend 24 hours in the backcountry capturing butterflies, using cameras, and even sequencing some of their legs in many cases. Another project we're really excited about is with the U.S. Forest Service. So 39,000 abandoned mine lands exist across U.S. Forest Service land alone. Think about that, 39,000 sites, and each one of them has a number of different features on it. They're the #1 contributors of arsenic, lead, mercury poisoning, and contamination to streams. And the issue is so massive, nobody really has been able to go out and survey each of these. So we're going to mobilize about 1,500 teams of volunteers to go out and do an assessment of these streams in order to prioritize them for reclamation. The 39,000 is huge, but it's just the beginning. There's actually 500,000 of these sites across the United States when you add in BLM and private land as well. So just tip of the iceberg, getting started with the Forest Service there. So that's kind of the overview of the organization. I'd love to answer any questions. I'd love to encourage you guys to visit our website, adventurescientist.org. You can sign up for projects there. We are part of the Google Employee Giving Program, so if anybody's looking to make contributions, we'd welcome those. Thank you. Are there any questions I can answer for you guys? Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for the talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. I know it's just one of the challenges you probably face, but as a person who's interested in technology and how it could be used to better support environmental monitoring, I'm curious to hear from your experience, what are some of the challenges you face in the technical component of these projects?
Yeah.
Actually connecting people and getting the data and making usable artifacts out of this?
Yeah, this has been one of our biggest challenges. So we've invested heavily in our Salesforce programming so that we can, somebody comes into the website, they sign up, and it has an automated workflow that makes sure we're checking in with them regularly. So we need to continuously perfect that process. So it's really from the sign up that happens. Then when somebody's getting trained, that's a key part where we need technology. I mentioned the idea of virtual reality and having people actually be able to go through filling their microplastics bottle right from the beginning. That would be such an incredible tool for us that we're just not there yet. We use a great app called Liquid to do our data collection. And they're constantly working to improve their systems and their processes. They just launched on Android pretty recently, and so there's a lot of bugs to get worked out there. Then it's as GoPro technology comes along and we can start to think about how we stream that stuff live so we can actually communicate with our volunteers right when they're in the field. That would be amazing. Then it's what happens in the analysis stages. So it is cutting edge technology to be able to sequence DNA from wood. It's not even fully there yet, but then next stages of that would be DNA fingerprinting from wood. So being able to literally say this is a tree from this tiny little region over here versus one from over here. That's 2 or 3 stages away that we're really excited about the incorporation with the handheld DNA sequencers. With our mine project, we need X-ray fluorescence to be able to shoot X-rays at rocks and get back a reading of what minerals are in those rocks. And the list goes on and on like this forever. So technology, what we do would absolutely not be possible just a few years ago. And what we're able to do now compared to when we even started in 2011 is night and day. There's another technology we use for microplastics called there's spectroscopy. So it's Raman spectroscopy or Raman spectroscopy, and then why am I blanking on the other one? FTIR is the other one that we use to try to get a reading of is this polyurethane, polyethylene. Really helps us identify the sources and where this stuff might be coming from. So it's across the board. We need help on our end with the platforms and how people's user experience is. We're actually bringing in a user experience specialist to come and help us with some of that stuff. So if anybody here has those expertise, please let me know, and we would love to chat with you. And then, so it's the user experience, but the analysis, it's all of it. And then how we report back is a major portion of this too. Everything from mapping, interactive mapping, how people interact with the experiences and the storytelling that people have. That's all essential to our work. So all of it needs to be better. And and all of it is amazing already, but all of it needs to be better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Anybody else?
So I was wondering how do you recruit people to work on your project? Is it only based on volunteering?
Yeah.
So that's my first question, and then second question is, how do you communicate to actually get more and more of those volunteer or people that are working on the project?
Yeah, so
across the globe, I guess, because we saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is international, and they are all volunteers, so no one's paid. Occasionally we'll have available funds to help with gas money to get out to the field, or if there's equipment involved, we're almost always able to cover those expenses. And then as far as how we get more, we really rely on those top tier athletes. The ambassadors is what we call them, and the ambassadors come take part in a project, and then they'll tweet about it and they'll share it on Facebook and all kinds of different social media, and that really helps us recruit as many people as we need. We haven't had a limit to how many people we can get. The limit is always in our capacity to do the analysis. Scientists can only handle so much incoming data. So for example, Abby processed, 2,500 samples this year? Yeah, over 3,000. So it's her and one other person working in a lab in Maine under a microscope all day. And so, you can only get through so many samples doing that. They're literally going through with microscopes and reading the size of a human hair from left to right on these 0.45 micron papers. And they're doing that at an incredible rate. So that's been our limiting factor. Likewise with Harvard, we started with a pilot. We've just wrapped up a pilot with them of 100 samples from 100 locations around the globe, and now it's time to scale that up. And so they need to build the infrastructure. That takes funding for them to be able to sequence all that incoming data. So that's a big part of it, but it's really been word of mouth and relying on those top-tier athletes and awesome talks like this that are going to reach millions of people we know online on YouTube.
And to volunteer, you basically have to go to the website, and it's pretty clear where you can submit. So do you have to submit an application or like choose a project? How does that work?
Yep, there's right on our homepage is if you're an adventurer, begin here. If you're a scientist, begin here. We are looking for ideas from scientists as well. Again, the 3 questions we ask is there an environmental issue where data is a limiting factor to unlocking a solution? Why do you need a clear outdoor network of people to do this? And then what is the tangible change that can happen as a result of your project? So if you've got an idea, you can submit it right on our website. If you're a volunteer, you click on Begin Here for Adventures. It brings you to our current projects. You can fill out an application to be involved there. And in some cases, like in the Landmark project on American Prairie Reserve, we had 9 applicants for every spot we had available. And others, like the Microplastics project, it's much more lenient. So come there, whether you have the best outdoor skills in the world or you're just an aspiring hiker, and we'll get you involved.
Do you have any projects in this region?
So in the New York area, we do have projects here. So the Microplastics project, Abby recently floated the length of the Hudson River and collected samples there. Sailed is a more accurate term, I'd say. She gets to travel all over. She just went to Bali collecting samples too. She's our ultimate adventure scientist. So yeah, there's the freshwater microplastic sampling would be a great one. Roadkill, there is a worldwide roadkill aspect. We're doing this targeted effort in California and hope to duplicate that here in future years. So New York City, not so much, but as soon as you get outside where there's some wildlife, absolutely could get involved with that. We've got, let's see, this tree project. We haven't identified which species we're focusing on in the US domestically, but there's a good chance you'll be able to participate in that as well if you get out to the Appalachians on the weekends.
I guess my question is, like, how hands-on are these projects with the people who volunteer? Question being, it seems like a lot of people need to collect data from like really remote areas, maybe protected lands. Mm-hmm. So do you need to make sure you know exactly where they're going? Do you work with like agencies to make sure they have access to like remote areas or, you know, things like that? Or are they kind of just on their own free reign? And if they get data from the region, it kind of works. I guess, how does that all work?
Yeah, each project's very different. So in some projects we have a very targeted species that we're saying you got to go find, you know, this particular species, and we'll train how to distinguish between others. In other projects, it's we want any animal scat we can get. You know, we try to get as much diversity as we can. So if somebody's going on one expedition that's say 100 miles long, we might say, you know, collect one sample every 10 miles. Try to get a bird from the first 10 miles, a mammal from the second, a reptile from the third. So there are parameters around what we want people to collect. And so we have a team of people based in Bozeman, Montana, that will work with each volunteer's expedition to make sure that they know what they're doing. We've got, for our microplastics sampling, people who are sailing around the world continuously for, I mean, we probably have volunteers on their 3rd or 4th year of doing that now. To people who go out in their local streams and get samples. And so each one really takes making sure that we don't get 10,000 samples from one area, because again, we can't process all those. So, you know, we'll limit what somebody can collect to say 10 and try to give them structure around it. As far as hands-on, after they've signed up and gotten trained and they have their protocols and we've individualized it for their expedition, they have access to our team. They'll be checking in. Our team will be checking in regularly, asking how it went, asking for photos and videos and the stories that we can share on our Nat Geo blog that we operate or that we can share on our blog. Yeah, Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome.
Hi. So you talked about all the technical help you can get before. Is there some form for like people with technical expertise to come and help you with these kind of things?
There's a contact us on the website. I'm happy to give you a card, but greg@adventurescience.org, or you could write to technology@adventurescience.org. And we would love to have your help. That'd be great.
So you spoke a little bit about the side of the volunteering and the data collection. I'm just curious more about the partnerships that you have with businesses like you mentioned, Harvard, who then take that data and do something with it to solve a problem. Which partnerships you forge and how you select them and how you follow up with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we get incoming ideas all the time on our website. A lot of it is just networking and meeting people. Citizen science in general has become this massively growing field. Citizen science is everything from amateur astronomers out there counting stars to you can swab your DNA. Like 23andMe is a great example of citizen science because they're compiling all that data and using it. We really focus on environmental issues and things that are needed from the outdoors that are especially remote environments is where I'd say we really thrive. So you've got to meet that initial criteria. And then everything is filtered through those 3 questions. And so we've got a science advisory board. We have a team at Adventure Scientists that helps filter through these. And we constantly are talking about, does it make sense to go pick up nematodes? Does it make sense to, focus on these tree species? What is going to be the best use? And what we really are looking for is that tangible outcome. That's probably the biggest driver for us. Is there something in the world that could potentially change as a result of this data? And so we're not going to hit a home run with every single one. We're not going to, just assume that we can solve antibiotic resistance or just assume that we're going to end illegal timber harvest. That's not it. It's more providing a new mechanism or a new tool to be able to approach those issues. And so our hope is that the partners we have will be able to do that. And so there's a vetting process that they go through. We're talking to others in their field. We have a science advisory board that I mentioned that will weigh in on whether their science is quality and whether they're the right partners for us. Then after there's that whole layer of the 3 questions, there's also more questions that we ask as far as like how responsive is this scientist? How proprietary with their data is this scientist? How well respected are they by their peers? How much do they encourage the storytelling and want to be on film with us for these projects? So we're not at the point yet as an organization where we have the luxury of turning away 10 scientists a week. I would hope that at some point in our future that there'll be so many great ideas that fit with our model that we have to make that tough choice of which projects are going to be a stronger fit. But we've been really good at saying no to projects that we know aren't a fit. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for being here. So my question is a little odd, but assuming money wasn't an issue, what would change about your organization in terms of how you run, what you work on? I'm assuming if money wasn't an issue, maybe you wouldn't be here in this room right now. And maybe I'm assuming there's some projects that are sexy that maybe you wouldn't work on if money wasn't an issue, but you got to do it because that's how you run.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say what we do wouldn't change. The projects we're developing, the projects we are investing in, we think of each project as an investment, and we don't have money to give, we have human capital to give. And so what we would be doing wouldn't change. The scale of those projects would change overnight. So if we got unlimited funds tomorrow, we would launch that WRI project with timber harvest. We would launch the roadkill project in California and go right to scale with it. We would do the pollinator project, and all of those would be up and running. We'd have the right teams available to support those. Each project comes with a project team associated with it to be able to make sure that they can run at scale and that the data remains trustworthy and quality. We would invest in each of those technology infrastructures that I talked about before, as far as the training goes, the education, and things like virtual reality, for example, to get our trainings happening there. And a lot more of my time would be in Bozeman focused on managing the team, growing the team, and making sure that we're as high quality as we are, rather than me being in the road raising money. Does that answer your question? Go. The what we do would stay the same, and that's because we've been really rigid about those three questions. My team tells me all the time we're too rigid about them and we need to be doing more. I say we want to be doing the right stuff. It doesn't matter. If we're taking on projects that aren't at the end of the day going to make a difference, we don't want to be doing them. Yeah.
Okay, so this is sort of going to the recruiting and trying to publicize your work. Mm-hmm. I found it fascinating what you're doing, and I was sort of amazed that I had not seen a film as part of the Banff Film Festival, Banff Outdoor Film Festival, covering your work. And I was curious if that's something you've been trying, that's a type of outlet you've been trying to reach, or did I just miss the year that you were in it? Yeah. And then related, a different type of question, I think the last Banff Festival, there was a very beautiful film about the hellbender salamanders in Appalachia, and how critical clean water and low silt water was to their habitats. Yeah. I was wondering if that's a project you've been thinking about, trying to collect data in the remote stream heads in Appalachia about the stream qualities.
Yeah, so we have been in the Banff Film Festival. There's a film made by a great filmmaker named Alexandra Bombach, that was in 2013's festival. We have been in Wild and Scenic pretty much every year for the last few years. And so we're constantly producing films, like that one with Jeremy Jones was in Wild and Scenic, and I don't know if that was in Banff or not, I'd have to double check, but has certainly made the film circuit rounds. So keep looking for those. We're getting better at that all the time, and there'll be more. And then as far as the Tiger Salamander project, we really look for this issue of scale. The why us question is also one of scale. And so, if it's something you could hire a group of technicians to do, if you could hire biological techs to go out and survey those, it's probably not the right fit for us. But if it were looking globally at tiger salamanders or at salamanders, something like that, it would capture our attention much more readily. Yeah.
Any other questions? We kind of have talked about this. This last question kind of covered it too. But when you mentioned you bring a lot of artists and photographers, storytellers, I'm just curious about that aspect and what kind of awareness you're trying to bring. Is it awareness for this project or awareness of just conservation in general? And what outlets you use? I know you mentioned the National Geographic blog and stuff. Yep. I guess what other avenues are you going for?
Yeah, so we maintain a blog on Nat Geo. It's our Voices blog, so it's voices.natgeo.com. Then we have 1% for the Planet blog. 1% for the Planet is another partner nonprofit. We rely on Patagonia and Cliff Bar and our amazing sponsors that help share our stories as well. And a lot of that is working with other athletes of theirs that helps us to change those or to share those stories. So we get the word out through them in those ways. And then, to your first question about, how we think about reach, and I think it really comes back to impact for us. So we think of impact around a bullseye. And our goal is at the center of that bullseye, unlocking solutions. So we want to be providing NGOs, governments, businesses with solutions. Where they don't have access to data, we go out and we get that data, and that enables them to do something differently. The governments are going to be able to determine on the spot whether timber was legally or illegally harvested. The researcher is better equipped to solve antibiotic resistance or address antibiotic resistance. The government in California, placement of overpasses and underpasses. So providing the businesses, governments, and NGOs with solutions is key. The next rung is behavior of the volunteer themselves. And so we survey every volunteer that comes into the organization that's collected data for us. They tell us that they're taking behaviors that they otherwise wouldn't have, that they weren't aware of microplastics before and are now, carrying reusable utensils with them. They're not using single-serving plastics. I'll challenge you guys today. I've done this for a month, and a friend of mine challenged me to do this for a month, but see if you can go 1 month without using any plastics that you won't use for a year or more. So if you've got your Nalgene water bottle or something like that, great. Better yet, use your clean canteen bottle that isn't a plastic bottle to begin with. But if you've got something that you're going to use for a year or more, that's fine. But see if you can go even 1 week without using single-serving plastics. If you can do that, then it will change your life forever. And even the process of trying to do that will change your life forever. I was on day 28 when I turned around and somebody put a lid on my coffee and totally screwed it. I was so upset. Those are the behavior changes that we really love as well. And then on the outer rung of that bullseye, we estimate our reach to be around 85 million people so far. And that's, we look at print, we look at how much viewership we had on the Weather Channel or on Nat Geo or whatever it was, and kind of add all those numbers up together. And that's awareness, and that's about, hopefully you guys all now will go Google microplastics and think about, how you can change your behaviors around that. Every time you wash a fleece jacket, millions of pieces of plastic can be shed into the waterway, and it's too small to be picked up by wastewater treatment, so it gets flushed right out. At least a percentage of it does. That's something nobody knows about, and so we're excited about sharing that message. But again, our main goal is really to be at the center of that bullseye. Does that get to your question? Cool. Anybody else? Yeah.
Thanks. All right, so when you were talking, actually, I just remembered something, and I hope this isn't a personal question. It's not meant to be a negative question at all.
Yeah.
So that town that you're from, Bozeman, is also like the headquarters of Greg Mortensen's organization.
It is.
Yeah, so do you have, I guess, do you have any lessons or so? Like, do you feel like that organization, the stories good and bad or whatever, have affected the way that you run this organization, or?
I called my dad.
Or no connection.
So for those of you who don't know, Greg Mortensen ran the Central Asia Institute and wrote the book 3 Cups of Tea, and it was widely reported that it was a fraud, and that he had the stories of being held hostage, et cetera, were not true. I called my dad. That was in 2011 that happened, and I called my dad and said, "Dad, I've started this nonprofit. I'm Greg from Bozeman. This isn't good. People are going to confuse this." I think it sent shockwaves through the whole NGO community. We really strive to be as transparent as we possibly can. Myself, because I have a public personality in addition to running the organization, I would say absolutely every single time I go on a trip for work, I'm really cautious of, is this a business expense? Is this a personal expense? Those questions are always getting asked of me by our board and by myself, and I do think that has been an eye-opener for how quickly things can go bad. And I would say about, I don't know Greg Mortensen personally, he's certainly known around our town. I don't believe he had any ill intentions. I think he was raising a lot of money to build schools in Afghanistan and was working hard to do that, and probably wasn't the best at managing money and keeping things separate between what's book tour and what's personal gigs for himself and what's benefited this organization. And so, if I have any questions about it, I talk about it with our board of directors, I talk about it with our advisors, and you can go on our website and see our financials published right on there. We try to be as transparent and above board as we possibly can. Anybody else? No? Going once? Cool. Thank you guys so much for being here. It's such an honor to speak at Google, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys as part of our adventure scientist team in the near future. Thanks, guys.